All right, and now I'm joined by Miguel, aka DevM. How you doing, Miguel? Good to see you.
Yeah, good to see you. I'm doing good. Just been down on the pathfinding mines.
So I'm glad that you're here to talk to us about pathfinding. So I know it's always a hot topic
Mm,
amongst our players. I know you implemented some vehicle pathfinding changes in our last update, 1.5. Can you maybe
yeah,
touch on that before we get into what you're doing in Coral Viper or 1.6?
yeah, for sure. So we had noticed that when reversing with vehicles, sometimes they would take like these wide paths, which for kind of frontal movement, that's fine because that kind of allows the vehicle to not lose any of its movement speed. But often when reversing, that can mean that you stay longer in the arc of fire of an enemy team weapon, for instance, and that could end up with you losing your vehicle. So we always have to be really careful with those kind of changes, or with pathfinding in general, because in Company of Heroes, losing a vehicle is very significant, right? Um, so we're striving to just give over control to the players when we do these changes rather than the game kind of trying to predict too much what you want to do. So in this case, we kind of tightened the curve so that the vehicles follow a lot more closely the path that you decided upon when reversing.
Okay, so it sounds like the work that you were doing in 1.5 was kind of obviously the ongoing work that we were trying to do here
Yeah.
to improve that feel, that game feel. And it sounds like you've done a lot more work that we're bringing out in Coral Viper. So can you maybe start describing some of the work that you've done here to improve pathfinding?
Yeah. So first, I think it's important to kind of define what the kind of problem statements were. So we had noticed lots of player frustration when engaging with pathfinding still, even though it was obviously an improvement and it has been improving ever since launch.
Mhm.
But we have what the community calls vehicle donuts, for example, where a vehicle kind of circles around. We also noticed that players felt like the pathfinding was inconsistent. And all of this kind of creates a frustrating experience with pathfinding because what you want with pathfinding is once you click as a player, you want to be able to know beforehand kind of what path the vehicle will take. You don't want to have to always keep your eyes on your vehicles when you click somewhere. You want it to be predictable. So a lot of the frustration that we wanted to address kind of comes from resolving that, the predictability of the pathfinding. Um, so with that in mind, the reverse changes that we did for 1.5 is that when the player clicks somewhere, their expectation many times is the shortest path. So, and that is also where the challenge has been because we have a game that's also trying to simulate reality to some extent.
Mhm.
So when a vehicle does a turn, if it's a really tight turn, it's going to lose speed. It would look very odd for any vehicle to do a tight turn and literally just zoom past through the tightest of turns. Uh, so it is beneficial that our pathfinding does wide turns many times, but we also have to acknowledge that there are some instances where the player wants to closely follow the path, which is why we started with the reverse behaviors for 1.5.
Mhm.
But now for 1.6, we wanted to address a lot more than that. And we started by looking at the vehicle donuts or the vehicles doing white circles.
Yeah.
So what we've done is we kind of started penalizing in a way turns that are too wide, uh, depending on the angle, which basically means that the vehicles will never do donuts because it's too penalized. It's too bad of a wide turn. And that with some turn plan adjustments should make the vehicles a lot more predictable, and you'll not be seeing the vehicles doing any like funny behaviors. Hopefully, um, with that in mind as well, talking about turn plans. So turn plans, which basically dictate how you do a certain path find. So how our game works is you calculate the path, and then turn plans kind of make that seem more realistic, where vehicles try and adapt their turns to kind of meet that path that we calculated.
Okay.
And we made multiple adjustments to turn plans. One of them, for example, was also reducing some of the radiuses on the turns, which actually really impacted on how sometimes vehicles could or could not fit into certain stretches of the map, uh, where maybe before they would incur that pivot, now they would be able to do an actual turn, which obviously from a player perspective is always a lot smoother to do turns instead of pivots. Um, Another thing that we changed, which players have been talking about before, this is also a turn plan change, is uh, how far back do you have to be uh, for the vehicle to not consider reversing anymore on your normal clicks, not the reverse command itself.
Right.
Um, so, kind of to give some context for people, the reason why we had things as we did is because for casual players or people that are not part of the hardcore multiplayer community, uh, often using direct commands like the reverse command is not something that players really use. Um, so we had to balance those out, those two worlds. So what we did is we have the value, so from 40 to 20, and this should make it a lot more consistent now. Where in the 20 unit range, uh, the unit will reverse if you click, but past that it will go with its front armor. And what this kind of allows is that for players that often just wanted the vehicle to go somewhere with the front armor over longer distances, they'll not reverse anymore, because we had noticed
Okay.
that sometimes even over long distances, where almost never a player wants the vehicle to be reversing over long distances, the vehicles were doing that. So that should solve that. Um, Another thing that we wanted to tackle, and make sure to stop me, John, if I'm going
No, no,
over
keep
too fast,
going. Keep going.
is Casemate vehicles. So we also noted that, particularly for players, these were kind of tough to use, and they are by far the vehicles that are also the toughest to kind of balance out with pathfinding. So because they have a fixed turret, they really do care if you do a turn like before or after. If they are already pointing to somewhere, um, they can easily get outflanked if the pathfinding does something wrong. So what we've done is we tightened the curves as well. So usually, if you do pre-face orders or usually movements with casemate vehicles, you'll notice that they have a very like S shape to their movement. Um, what we've done is we tightened both of them, and now it should be a lot easier for the vehicle to, once it starts moving, to already have the turret facing where you want it to turn. Whereas before, because the S turn was so wide, it could happen that on the last stretch of the turn, you would have your back against the enemy, which many times created like a frustrating experience. Um, so what it should feel like now is, I'd say, an improvement over Company of Heroes 2. We did take that as inspiration as well. It should feel a lot more safe now to use casemate vehicles overall. Um, and I think the last thing that I would do want to mention is changes to what we call sector path. Uh, so we have what we call a sector path, and we have what we call a low path. And the low path, for people out there that are kind of familiar with this, is kind of your pathfinding algorithm. Many times we call it A star. That's kind of the industry standard for that.
Mhm.
But we also have a sector path that kind of helps this low path pathfind around a large map. That's its kind of the purpose of it. So we've made adjustments to both of them, and the what we want to hit with those is how the vehicles feel when they're going around objects. So many times it's not enough to have just the shortest path to somewhere, because the shortest path might be that you go with your back around an object instead of with the front. So we made adjustments to both of them yet again to feel a lot more smooth and predictable. Where if you're with the vehicle going around an object, it's more likely that it'll just go with the front because it makes more sense. And we also made some adjustments to the overall long distance pathfinding, where before we had some unpredictability with if the vehicle was facing somewhere. In that case, because it's over a longer distance, you don't care as much if the vehicle is facing somewhere. You just want the shortest path. So over long distances, that behavior kind of changes. So we had to adjust for that. And I mean, player expectation changes on that. So those were all the big changes, but something that is always not reflected on these changes as well is that we also did some bug fixing around pathfinding, that we had noticed some odd behaviors.
Okay.
So that will always feel also it's hard for the players to really understand those ones, but it will make the pathfinding feel overall a lot more predictable and fun to engage with.
Okay. Hey, that's good to hear, because I know our goal with this is always to uh, again make vehicles feel responsive, make the game
Yes.
feel fun, and to reduce that player frustration. I know a lot of the subjects that you were kind of covering here with the changes that were being implemented, and some of the concepts that you were talking about are a little bit complex. I'm just a simple community manager from the prairies. So sometimes this stuff is over my head, but I know we're going to be releasing a comprehensive blog post that you wrote up describing all these changes.
Yes.
So that will go up in tandem with the patch notes. So folks can go check that out at community.companyofheroes.com, so they can read that more in-depth explanation. But Miguel, I know one of the things that we sometimes hear from players is a little bit of frustration over why these types of changes might be taking a little bit of time to implement. So I'm
Mhm.
wondering if you can maybe describe sort of the depth of complexity here, and why it might take us a little bit of time to get these changes out to players.
Yeah. So pathfinding is one of the systems that you need to be really careful about when you touch. It has heavy implications on every part of the game, even single player. So what that means is that if you change something on pathfinding, you need to be able to test almost everything again. And not only that, but because of how our maps are complex, and our vehicles, the way they work, are also complex. Like each vehicle almost has their own acceleration, their own speed, their own pivot rate, everything. And all of those impact how pathfinding works, right? So if a vehicle is like very mobile, they'll be able to do turns that kind of clunky tank wouldn't. So it's very hard often to do a change of pathfinding and just release it. You need to be able to thoroughly test it and also see if it hits the goals that you originally had.
Mhm.
Um, so that is the reason why pathfinding takes longer. But not only that, but it's not only about the testing, but even doing the changes. This is not only kind of data changes; these are also behavioral changes in the code. So code is always going to be prone to bugs, new bugs, if you change behavior, especially when there are so many things depending on it, right?
Mhm.
So we want to be able to do these changes and properly test them and be able to iterate on them and see if it hits the goals that we had.
Right. We want to make sure that we do this work right and not necessarily
Yes.
rush it. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. That's thank you for explaining that. I really appreciate it. And I know we're going to continue monitoring player feedback on these changes and these systems as we move forward. And I know we really appreciate everyone's patience, as I know you and the rest of the team have been hard at work on this. Miguel, any sort of final thoughts on the pathfinding changes coming in Coral Viper?
Yeah, I just want players to give feedback when they can on the official forums. We are always looking for feedback, especially on pathfinding. Hopefully, this set of changes will finally make the game kind of feel a lot more responsive and predictable, which is what players wanted. And specifically, just let me hear your thoughts on how Casemate vehicles feel now, those Marder tanks.
um, that's great. Thanks so much, Miguel. Appreciate you joining us here to explain everything that you've been working on for 1.6. And we'll just move on to the next segment. So thanks, everyone.
Thank you.